Here is a discussion of the magnificent poem, The Raven, by the American poet Edgar Allan Poe. Edgar Allan Poe lived from 1809 to 1849. He was a major figure in world literature, both as a creative artist and as a critic of the works of his contemporaries, especially the transcendentalists. Poe was one of the most influential American writers of the 19th century. He was best known for his poetry. He was one of the major writers of the short story, and he is famous for his tales of horror and mystery. Poe presents a dark, macabre, and mysterious background for most of his works, both short stories and poems. Poe's poems have a haunting musical quality, which you can see in The Raven as well. They also employ visual and metaphorical imagery to illustrate his themes, mostly of death and lost love. Poe belonged to the tradition of American Romanticism. American Romanticism extended from the beginning of the 19th century to the end of the Civil War in the 1860s, at which time there was the rise of realism, Mark Twain being a very important figure of realism. Now, what are the values of American Romanticism? American Romanticism gave importance to originality and innocence. It valorized an unspoiled nature from which man can learn directly. It gave importance to solitary life, such as what Henry David Thoreau led near the Walden Pond, and it embraced freedom of spirit. American Romantics glorify the power of inner experience. Therefore, the American Romantics explore psychology of the characters. They also explore emotion and imagination. American Romantics upheld the values of American culture, such as individualism, self-reliance, and equality. In literature, the American Romantics employed symbolism and formal experimentation. The important figures in American Romanticism are the frontier writers like Washington Irving and James Fenimore Cooper, the transcendentalists like Ralph Waldo Emerson and Henry David Thoreau, and their friend Walt Whitman, as well as the dark romantics, Nathaniel Hawthorne, Herman Melville, Edgar Allan Poe, and Emily Dickinson. These are the important figures of American Romanticism. A variety of American Romanticism is called dark Romanticism. The dark Romantics had a fascination for the irrational, the obscure, and the demonic. They wrote about themes of human fallibility, and self-destruction, even madness, as in Captain Ahab in Moby Dick, inner corruption, revenge, evil, sin, and guilt, as in Manfred in Byron's play Manfred. The Gothic is a subgenre of dark romanticism practiced by Horace Walpole in The Castle of Otranto and other works in England. Edgar Allan Poe also employed Gothic elements in his writing. The Dark Romantics employed medievalism, which you find in Gothic literature, supernatural elements, and picturesque scenery. Dark Romanticism was a reaction against the optimistic and euphoric spirit of the Transcendentalists. Edgar Allan Poe vehemently criticized the euphoria and optimism of the Transcendentalists. They believed in human perfection, while the Dark Romantics believed in human fallibility and evil. Now, a quick look at the features of Edgar Allan Poe's style. In both his short stories and poetry, Edgar Allan Poe employed a dark, psychologically probing style, replete with Gothic elements. He was well known for a unique choice of words that are musical and deep, profound. He also made use of repetition of words and ideas and arresting imagery, powerful visual imagery. Poe's short stories and even poetry is touched by suspense. They deploy unreliable narrators and very macabre, eerie settings. Poe generally wrote about themes of death, regret, lost love, or madness. Sometimes you find all of these in his writing. However, Poe did not write just horror stories. Poe's horror stories are a small percentage of his entire writing. He wrote a lot of comedies, and there is also a strain of comedy or cynicism in his Gothic literature. Now, a quick look at the poem. The poem was likely written in the summer of 1844, and it was published the next year. Poe had written an earlier poem, Lenore, in 1843. Remember, in this poem, the narrator mourns the death of his beloved Lenore. Poe in 1846 wrote an essay, The Philosophy of Composition, describing the writing of the poem The Raven. We will discuss this essay briefly at the end of this video. In the essay, Pope says that the topic was chosen because, when told from the lips of a bereaved lover, the death of a beautiful woman is unquestionably the most poetic topic in the world. The Raven is a poem of grief and loss. The distraught protagonist is visited by a talking bird, a raven, who keeps repeating nevermore. One word. It has 18 six-lined stanzas. And the refrain is, quoth the raven, nevermore. Let us take a look at the poem in detail. Here is a stanza-wise summary. Stanza 1. Once upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered, weak and weary, over many a quaint and curious volume of forgotten lore, while I nodded, nearly napping, suddenly there came a tapping, as of someone gently rapping at my chamber door. "'Tis some visitor," I muttered, tapping at my chamber door. Only this and nothing more. The poem opens in a traditional storytelling mode. Once upon a midnight dreary. You expect once upon a time. And directly, rather unexpectedly, from once upon a, he delves deep into the dark and somber mood that envelops the entire poem. With the very first 2 lines. Weighed down with the preponderance of long vowels and diphthongs, over many a quaint and curious volume of forgotten lore, while I nodded, nearly napping, suddenly there came a tapping, as of someone gently rapping at my chamber door. Long vowels and diphthongs, words that create a heavy, hoary atmosphere. Dreary, weak, weary, pondered, quaint and curious, forgotten lore. The 2 lines dissipate the fairy tale beginning. At the beginning, the first line was almost like a fairy tale. The second and third lines are full of dark, somber words. The ominous title, The Raven, with its associations of death and dark evil, and the word midnight at the start of the poem, have already forewarned the reader that this is no ordinary nighttime reading. However, the fact that the protagonist is nodding, almost napping, both colloquial words, lull us into believing that this is an ordinary night, and the tapping seems normal enough. But is there something wrong? Is there something supernatural or frightening about this rapping? That is, till the trochaic tetrameter 6th line says, only this and nothing more. That is trochaic tetrameter, the 6th line, the last line in the stanza. Poe was an advocate of craft over message in poetry. What is most important is craft. It is the form that should bring the message. And the first stanza of the poem, as all the other stanzas, proves this, that form is more important and it brings the content. Now, stanza 2. Distinctly I remember, it was in the bleak December, and each separate dying ember wrought its ghost upon the floor. Eagerly I wished the morrow, vainly I had sought to borrow from my books surcease of sorrow, sorrow for the lost Lenore. For the rare and radiant maiden whom the angels name Lenore, nameless here for evermore. Poe, the master of mystery stories, and in a true mystery writing style, delays the suspense for the next two stanzas. We don't yet know what is the story, what happened to Lenore, and who is rapping on the door. Just as Shakespeare created a whole scene of intense drama with a few minutes of knocking in the play Macbeth, Poe lets the tapping at the door go on while he fills us in on the background details. We don't know yet who is rapping on the door. But the imagery of death and dying and ghosts and fantastic terrors continue, keeping us on tenterhooks. The speaker lets us in on his mood, which is sorrowful, and the reason for the sorrow, which is the death of Lenore, and how he wishes for the morning. Perhaps at night he feels the presence of his beloved. I'm reminded of Heathcliff and Catherine. He wishes for the morning, though he has been trying to get some relief from sorrow by reading. The mood turns even more somber when we are told she is nameless in this world, and only angels call her name now. The tapping at the door becomes a tapping at our mind's door too, as we begin to wonder who could be at the door at this ungodly hour. Is it the ghost of Lenore? Let me in, let me in. We don't know yet. And here is stanza 3. And the silken, sad, uncertain rustling of each purple curtain thrilled me, filled me with fantastic terrors never felt before. So that now, to still the beating of my heart, I stood repeating, "'Tis some visitor entreating entrance at my chamber door. Some late visitor entreating entrance at my chamber door. This it is, and nothing more." Poe continues with his description of the room, where the fitful glow from the dying embers cast ghostly shadows on the floor. Ghostly shadows. In the silken, sad, uncertain rustling of the curtains. Is there somebody behind the curtains? Why are the curtains rustling? Can you feel it? Is there somebody in this chamber? With a clever use of sibilant sounds, Poe now creates a hushed whispering sound as though arising from the distant fields of death. The sibilant sounds, listen to this, the silken, sad, uncertain rustling. See? Silken and purple, associated with the rare and radiant maiden Lenore, contrast with the sad and uncertain world of death. Though silken and purple, the curtains rustling fills him with terror, which he admits could be merely imaginary and not real. Then, to comfort himself, he says, "'Tis some visitor entreating entrance at my chamber door. Some late visitor entreating entrance at my chamber door. This is it, and nothing more." He's reassuring himself. But still, there is some niggling doubt in his mind, betrayed by the one additional word in the repeated 5th line, late. some late visitor. Late visitor. Does it mean dead visitor? For at that time of the night, which visitor could be knocking at his door? Could it be Lenore? And then the sixth tetrameter line, with its overemphasis, clearly gives away the lack of conviction in his own mind. This it is, and nothing more. He's not sure. It could be Lenore, because he can intensely feel her presence in the room. Poe was rightly admired for the psychological truth of his portrayals, and considered a forerunner of writers like Dostoevsky in this. Here we get a small glimpse of Poe's exquisite craftsmanship. And here is stanza 4. Presently my soul grew stronger, hesitating then no longer. Sir, said I, O madam, truly your forgiveness I implore. But the fact is I was napping, and so gently you came rapping, and so faintly you came tapping at my chamber door, that I scarce was sure I heard you. Here I opened wide the door. Darkness there, and nothing more. After the whole build-up, during which Poe kept the reader biting his nails in suspense, in this stanza an element of normalcy is restored, as the protagonist gets a handle on his own nerves. He is getting his courage to open the door. In 4 lines of polite conversation, Sir, O madam, truly your forgiveness I implore. But the fact is I was napping, and so gently you came rapping, and so faintly you came tapping at my chamber door, that I scarce was sure I heard you. He says in polite conversational style. He apologizes for the delay in opening the door. And yet, the suppressed concern about the untimely knocking comes out in the repetition of the word tapping. So gently you came rapping, and so faintly you came tapping at my chamber door. He opens the door wide in a show of unconcern and sees nothing but darkness. There is no one there. The effective stanza break and the shorter last line of the stanza. Here I opened wide the door. Pause. And then the short line. Darkness there and nothing more. The shorter last line of the stanza replicate the time it takes for the realization that there is nothing there to sink in. Oh my God, there is nobody at the door. Who was tapping on the door? Darkness there and nothing more. And this comes after keeping the tapping alive for 4 stanzas. For 4 stanzas we were hearing the tapping alive. Eerie tapping. So for the reader as well, there is no escaping the mystery. The reader is drawn into the mystery. This is so much like his short stories as well. If there is nothing out there, where did the insistent tapping come from? Look at stanza 5 now. Deep into that darkness peering, long I stood there wondering, fearing, doubting, dreaming dreams no mortal ever dared to dream before. But the silence was unbroken, and the stillness gave no token, and the only word there spoken was the whispered word, Lenore. This I whispered, and an echo murmured back the word Lenore. Merely this, and nothing more. The first two lines of the next stanza. Deep into that darkness peering, long I stood there, wondering, fearing, doubting, dreaming dreams no mortal ever dared to dream before. Am I meeting the ghastly presence of my Lenore? Is she coming back to me from the dead? That dream he's dreaming. The first two lines of the next stanza are again a testimony to Poe's technical brilliance. The speaker's reaction is predictable. He peers into that darkness. His mind is a whirl of fearful thoughts, which culminate in him whispering aloud his dead lover's name, wondering if she it was who knocked at his door in the dead of the night. Lenore? Long vowels make it seem like that moment of shocked stillness lasted for a long time. And the alliteration and repetition of the "der" sound echo the frantic beat of his frightened heart. But there is only stillness and a whispered word, Lenore, which was spoken by him, daring to dream that she had come back from the dead. All he heard in reply was an echo, nothing more. So he turns back into the room. There is no Lenore. And here is stanza 6. Back into the chamber turning, all my soul within me burning. Soon again I heard a tapping, somewhat louder than before. Surely, said I, surely that is something at my window lattice. Let me see then what thereat is, and this mystery explore. Let my heart be still a moment, and this mystery explore. 'Tis the wind, and nothing more. He turns back to his chamber with a trembling heart. The hyperbole, all my soul within me burning, expresses his inexpressible mental toil. When the tapping resumes, this time at the window, there's a deliberate attempt by him to let his head and not his heart rule over him. Surely that is something at my window lattice. Let me see then what thereat is, and this mystery explore. It is his reason that is working here. The unadorned, matter-of-fact next 4 lines, devoid of sound play or evocative diction. Surely, said I, surely that is something at my window lattice. Let me see then what thereat is, and this mystery explore. Let my heart be still a moment, and this mystery explore. 'Tis the wind, and nothing more. This is the unadorned, matter-of-fact 4 lines, devoid of sound play or evocative diction, bringing the reader back to the realm of normalcy from the dark night's ghastly terrors. We have to come back to normalcy. There is nothing there, just the wind. The last line, once again, however, casts doubt on his apparent calmness of mind. Is he really calm? Is he seeing things? Does he really believe that it's normal? Is he seeing Lenore and hearing her tap at his window? Stanza 7. Open here I flung the shutter, when with many a flirt and flutter, In there stepped a stately raven of the saintly days of yore. Not the least obeisance made he, not a minute stopped or stayed he, but with mien of lord or lady perched above my chamber door. Perched upon a bust of Pallas, just above my chamber door. Perched and sat, and nothing more.